This Democracy Dialogue about Issue 1 was sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Northern Portage County.
This was not part of the deal.
You didn't read fine print. Well, thank you for being here tonight and for your interest in learning about Issue 1. I see so many familiar faces in the crowd. It's nice to see. Some people say Issue 1 is confusing. To League members, we're clear on it because we've been advocating for fair districts and fair elections for more than 4 decades. Redistricting flows in our blood. I'm April Sakura, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters in Northern Portage County. We are a nonpartisan political organization. We do not support or oppose a candidate, but we do endorse issues that are of concern to members and the public in order to make democracy work. Our founders believe that voters must always have the facts to be informed voters. So let me introduce our speaker who will give us just the facts on Issue 1. Sherry Rose is the Development Director at the League of Women Voters Ohio, and she is also the current president of the League of Women Voters Kent. So here she is. Sherry?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me here this evening. So, we're going to start out a little bit on the basics, all right? Because before we can get into exactly what Issue 1 is, I think it's important to start out with what redistricting is. So, when we talk about redistricting, all right, we're talking about district lines. So, what does that mean? So, it means that every 10 years, okay, we do a census, okay? So we figure out how many people we have, right, in the state, in the country, all right? And from that, we determine how many elected officials we get in our state. So we did have 16 representatives in the state of Ohio. In 2020, okay, we lost a seat, right? So we needed to redraw the lines because we lost population in our state. There are other states in the nation that actually increased in population. So they needed to redraw to make different districts to include more representatives, okay? So when we do the redrawing of the districts, right, they need to look the same, right? We need to have ones that, let's just say it's 17,000, okay? Let's just say that every district has about 17,000. So it should kind of look like we have 17,000 here, and we have 17,000 here, and we have 17,000 here, right? Makes sense that your district looks the same. That you look the same as your neighbor, so that you're not, right, is the same district as, let's just say that we're in, right, Northern Portage County, that we're not in a district with, let's say, Cincinnati, right? They don't look like us. They don't look like what is here, right? So we want a district that kind of looks like us, okay? So when they redraw district lines, you kind of want those districts to look the same, okay? So where does gerrymandering come into that, okay? Gerrymandering is when you have politicians that want to keep their power, right? And if they are already in power, they want to stay in power, right? So they decide that when this new census came out, they decided that they were like, well, we'll have 17,000 here, but then, oh, maybe we'll have 17,000 here, and then maybe 17 here, and then maybe 17 here, and that's called gerrymandering. So when those district lines go outside, right, of norm, when they go outside to keep to keep a party in power, it's called gerrymandering. Why? Because this has been happening for over 150 years. This is not new. This is not new. This is not new. This has been going on for a long time. And how do we know? Because Elder Jerry was the mayor of Boston. And Elder Jerry wanted to stay in power. And so when he got the chance to redraw the lines, or to redraw the line in Boston, he redrew his district to stay mayor, and it looked an awful lot like a salamander, gerrymander, and we've had gerrymander ever since. So, we now call it gerrymandering. So anytime district lines are drawn to favor a party, we call it gerrymandering. So, Ohio has been fighting gerrymandering, as April said. We've been fighting gerrymandering for over 50 years. So this is not new to us. It is not new to the voters in Ohio. In the 80s, Ohio was gerrymandered the other direction. So the Democrats were in power. They were the ones that drew the lines, and in fact, they drew the lines to favor who? Their party, right? League of Women Voters said, no, 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 they should be fair. They should represent the voters of Ohio. They should always favor the voters of Ohio. The voters should be the ones that are choosing their legislators, not their legislators choosing who their voters should be. So in 2015, actually, even prior to that, okay, let's even go back. We're going to go back to 1981. So 1981 was the very first time that a piece of legislation was put in front, okay, of the legislators in Columbus by a lady named Joan Lawrence. Joan Lawrence was a Republican representative from Delaware County. She was the very first one to actually present an anti-gerrymandering a piece of legislation. It failed, as you can imagine, at that time. Joan Lawrence is 94 years old. She is still fighting to end gerrymandering. And she has told us continually that she hopes she lives long enough to see the end of gerrymandering in Ohio. So she is still fighting to see the end of it. And even though her party is in power, she understands that at the very foundation of our democracy is equal representation in the state house. So what does that mean, and why does it matter? Well, when we look at the last presidential election, okay? It was 55% for President Trump, and it was 45% for, for President Trump, and 45% for President Biden, okay? So we're pretty much a 50-50 state, okay? So representative-wise, okay, the legislature should pretty much look like 55-45. We are almost 80-20. And in our House, with the representatives, we are actually about 70-30. That's still not 55-45, right? So why does that matter? Well, what we get is extremes, right? We have a supermajority, right? They don't need to listen to the constituents. They don't need to listen to their constituents because there's a supermajority in office, right? So they don't need to represent the voters in Ohio. Why is this important to us? Because we're the voters. Because they should be listening to us, right? So in 2015, 2012 and even prior to that, right, all the way leading up to this, we have put forth these constitutional amendments to try to change the Constitution to say these maps are unfair. They're not representative of who we are as a state, right? We need to have a more representative map drawing as to representative of who we are. So in 2015, many of you probably in this room picked up the clipboards and went around and got the signatures to put the ballot measure on, and it passed the ballot measure to change the House and the state Senate, right? So it was for the Ohio congressional districts, okay? Passed by 70%. So a little over 70% of Ohio voters said, we want to end gerrymandering in the state house, okay? In 2018, it went back on the ballot. This time it was for the congressional, so the federal congressional offices. And once again, by a little over 70%, Ohio voters said, yes, we want to end gerrymandering in the state of Ohio, and we want equal representation in Washington, D.C. 2020 came around, and all hell broke loose in Ohio. And so the map making that was supposed to happen in 2020, and in that time process, got delayed, and in 2022, they started the map process, and what we know is there were a lot of delays, and 7 times did those maps go before the Ohio Supreme Court, and 7 times they were ruled unconstitutional. Why? Because they didn't follow that 2015 and the 2018 constitutional amendments that had been passed. So the Supreme Court sent it back to the commission. So who is the commission? The commission had 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So you can see how this went, right? By a vote of 5 to 2, did they agree on the maps, send it back to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court said, no, unconstitutional. Send it back to the commission, 5 to 2. Send it back to the Supreme Court. This happened 7 times. We are currently under maps that are unconstitutional. Now, it has been said that, well, the Democrats voted for these maps, so they must be okay. Well, at that time, they were presented with 2 different options. This option would give 6 seats to the Democrats. This would give 4. Their choice was 6. That was their choice. To protect the constituents that they could. Okay? So, here we are. So what is issue 1? Issue 1 is saying, okay, we now know and we now have found out that this commission and the redistricting commission, the way that it was laid out in 2015 and 2018 is not working. So, knowing that, what could it look like? It could look like an independent commission. Okay, what does that look like? So, Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor aged out at 70. Okay, so at the end of her term, she aged out. And she said, I will make it my life's mission to see the end of gerrymandering in Ohio. Because she knew that at the very foundation of democracy are fair maps. And she was also the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that sent it back 7 times to the Redistricting Commission and said, fix it. So she said, okay, I'll fix it. And so she got together some of the best and brightest minds in the mapping world and said, what could this look like? So they went to places like Arizona and Colorado and Minnesota and talked to the experts there that had already done an independent commission. And they were using citizens in their independent commissions. And they said, what could it look like? And they took the best of all of what had worked and put it all together and came up with citizens, not politicians. So saying, let's put it in the hands of citizens. Let's put it in the hands of the people that it's going to affect. Let's actually give the power to the people and take the politicians who actually are going to benefit the most from keeping, right, those 17,000, right, in their districts. Let's actually take them out of the equation. Let's put them aside and let's bring it into the hands of the people. So, what does that look like? Well, it looks like a panel in its most basic form. It looks like a panel of judges, okay? 3 Democrats, 3 independents, I think I'm doing this right, and 3 Republicans, okay, that choose, okay, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 5 independents. That is your redistricting commission. They would be the ones to draw the maps. Now, we've heard the question, what would qualify them to draw the maps, right? Well, there are map makers and software, right, that draw the maps. They take all the data that we have and they take it all in and it shoots out possible maps. Okay? It says, this is possible, this is possible, this is possible, and this stays within the realm of the Constitution. Now, the question was, why didn't they use that before? They did. They did. And if anybody was as nerdy as I was during the last map drawing, they brought in 2 different map makers. The Republicans had one and the Democrats had one, and they had them on live stream TV. And if you were like I was, I've had it on here while I was working and just watched them all day long to do the maps and watch them because we could watch what they were doing and they actually came up with fair maps. What we didn't know is that there were some maps, right, that were happening that weren't here, right? So what citizens, not politicians, have said is the maps that we need here need to be in that room. We need that transparency, right? We want to see what is being drawn right here so that we can see what the commission is working on and it's right out for everybody to see in public, right? So, is it complicated? That's why the amendment itself is like 40 pages long, right? And it is some intense reading if you have, right? So, because it wants to make sure that it is foolproof, right? We want to make sure that we're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's and making sure that we get it right this time and to make sure that it works, okay? So, when you have an amendment, okay, you also have ballot language, okay? Ballot language and the amendment are different, okay? But when you submit it, okay, you submit, here is our amendment. Nobody wants a ballot that has 40 pages on the ballot, right? Nobody wants that. So what they do is they submit what would be an executive summary, right? If you have a book report, you have an executive summary. Well, that's what ballot language is. It's an executive summary. So here's your executive summary. The executive summary that CMP put forth was about 178 words, something like that. It was put forth before the ballot board. The ballot board is headed up by Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Frank LaRose was part of the 5, okay? He does not want this initiative, okay? So they reworded this to say, well, first they reworded it to about 780 words. So the ballot language that will be on the ballot is about 7 times what was initially submitted, okay? So, the ballot language reads, blah, 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 blah. This will, it includes gerrymandering the state of Ohio. So, we know that that is not what the amendment says. We know that that's not what the amendment says. So, we, right, are going around and talking about what is yes. What does it mean to say yes to issue 1? What we are saying is, yes, we want citizens to come up with fair maps. We don't want politicians to say what their districts look like anymore. We want to have fair maps that represent the true 55-45 that we truly are as a state. We want to have fair representation at the State House as well as in Washington, D.C. So we want that fair representation. And the way that we see going forward is that idea of allowing citizens to draw the maps and to take politicians out of that. Now, how does that happen? It's a process, right? It certainly is. So what do those 15 people look like? They don't look like lobbyists. They could have never lobbied. They could have never been in a political organization. They could not have ever held an office. They could not have ever been married to or I mean, there is a whole laundry list of people that are not eligible to serve on the commission, right? Again, that idea of keeping politics separate from the maps, right? It should be separate. It isn't about the politicians. It is about the voter. It is about protecting the voter and protecting the districts that represent them. There is a district currently that runs from Columbus, Metro Columbus, all the way down to Athens. There is no representative in the world that could possibly represent someone in Metro Columbus and Appalachia. They can't, I mean, they're not fighting for the same things. They can't be with one voice, right? They can't fight for all of those constituents. They don't look the same. We need those districts to come together so they look the same. So they're fighting for those people in their communities, not the people that live 200 miles away that can't even ever get to their office to even come and tell them or even see or when they have office hours, they're 200 miles away. I mean, they can't even come and see their legislator. So that is really what issue 1 is and how it started, right? So we started with the whole idea of what redistricting is and why it's necessary, right? We have to redraw. We do. Every 10 years, we lose or gain population. So we have to redraw every 10 years, period. So creating the rules around that is what issue 1 really is all about. Like, what does that look like going forward? So when that 10 years comes around, although this will happen before then, but when that 10 years comes around, what does that look like now? And why are we putting it into the Constitution? Because then it's solid, it can't be changed, right? It can only be changed then by the citizens. It can't be changed by the lawmakers, right? Because an amendment has to be changed by the citizens. Questions?
Well,
we have questions from the audience.
we were able to ask questions, or from folks from our social media channels, plus our audience here. The way we normally do our democracy dialogues is that we have a moderator who then asks our presenter. So if someone doesn't feel comfortable asking directly, they can submit it by paper.
Perfect.
I have some pre-questions from the floor, and then I'll collect some other comments as we go. So the first 3 are very similar, so I'll go through these. Who are these citizens on the panel who know? And how can we be sure that they'll be impartial or nonpartisan? And then if the voters don't like the results of what this commission does, how are we holding them accountable?
Good question. There are public hearings. There will be public hearings as part of the citizens, not politicians, just as they had with the other, like with the past redistricting commissions. There will be times and places for the public to, for public hearings. So how do we know that they will remain impartial is that we will have voting records. So we know how they have registered to vote. So we will have that information and it will be under scrutiny as well as they go forward.
All right, questions I'll collect them. Okay. What happens if issue 1 does not pass?
If issue 1 does not pass, they will go back to the drawing board on these maps, and it will go before the Supreme Court again, but not until the next census.
And then who is funding both the yes side and who is funding the no side? Like who's the opposition to this and who's supporting it?
There are multiple groups. The Citizens Not Politicians is, again, is kind of spearheaded with Maureen O'Connor was really the one that kind of brought it all together, but there are groups across Ohio. League of Women Voters, of course, being one of those supporting groups. AFL-CIO is another one of those organizations. The no opposition really is coming from the Republican Party, and they have truly really gone on all in because this is, obviously, this is challenging, right, the power that they hold in the State House at this time. So there are many different organizations and obviously PACs too that are funding both sides of the campaign.
Well, let's talk about that. If I'm a Republican and I'm in a safe GOP district, why should I care? Like why? Things seem to be going right for me. Like why is this a big deal?
That's a very good question, right? Because this is good for democracy, right? And it is when we look at representative government, okay? When we do not see a representative government, we have extremes, right? We see extreme politicians on both sides, right? So again, this is different in states like currently Pennsylvania, right, is experiencing gerrymandering in a different capacity, right? So, for a Republican currently, maybe not, but it isn't a representative government, right, to them. And when we look at a democracy, not everyone has a fair voice if we do not have fair districts in that regard. Now, there was something else that you said in there, but I'll think of it. Go ahead, because there was another point I wanted to make there.
Well, do you think that so the league seems to be supporting issue 1 because it doesn't, for ending gerrymandering. Is the league also active in wanting to end it in Pennsylvania when it's the Democrats who are in charge or in a gerrymandered map, or is it,
Absolutely, absolutely. Good question, because we too were, again, in support with Joan Lawrence and the Republicans in Ohio in the 1980s and 90s, and saying that this is not a representative government. And our tagline as the league is making democracy work. And at its very foundation, a representative government is democracy. That is democracy. And so anything that does not support, right, a democracy is where, that is our mission, right? And we will continue, right, to fight for that. We'll also say that in August, actually it was June of this year, Attorney General Yost, the legislature passed a law that said that any money that was funding a statewide initiative, okay, could not come in from anyone that was not a U.S. citizen and that had not been sourced from a U.S. fund. So, anyone that has donated, so part of that question is who's funding this, is anyone that has funded either side of this has had to sign a document that states they are a U.S. citizen and the money that they have donated has come from the U.S. So that was just implemented. It started on September 1st, but we as the league started this at the end of June, so we knew that so any of our money and any of the citizens not politicians has been under that rule for even before the statute took effect.
So let's go back to the 15 people. How does one get up even on that list to be considered for the 15? Like, where do these people even come from?
They're everyday citizens. They're people that care. They're people that have an interest and have the time, right? There's going to be a lot of time invested in this. And so it's going to be people that have the interest and the time, and there will be an application process. So once
anybody can apply.
It could be anybody that can apply as long as they fit the requirements and they do not have any of the
So you don't have to know somebody to know somebody to know somebody.
that you do not have to know somebody to know somebody to know
And if you
somebody.
knew somebody, you then can't apply because
Exactly. Because you knew somebody.
So if this does pass, will new maps be in place in 2026? Did you say that before?
In 2026, that is that's part of the amendment language, is that as part of that transparency, right, is that there are also deadlines in there for the commission to hit in going forward. That was one of the challenges with the commission the previous time, is that some of those deadlines were pressed up and they were missed, right? And so it just kept backing up and backing up and backing up, and by the time we knew it was election time, and we had ballots that had to go out, and so hence we're sitting with maps that are unconstitutional.
So you would use the phrase a few times, districts that look the same. Are you talking physically looking the same, or what do you mean by that?
Oh, good question. So, again, when we're talking about the constituents within a district, not that it necessarily is geographically the same. So it doesn't just look like a circle, or it looks like a square,
So
or...
it would just be county lines. We're just going to keep the districts county lines and call it a day.
Right, it's not just the county lines, it's who are your neighbors? Who are your neighbors, and do they look the same? Again, that idea of there was a district, right, along the coast of Cleveland that ran pretty much from Lakewood almost over to Toledo, and it hit from urban to farmland, almost to urban, and then they had suburbia, and then they don't look the same, right? Like their issues are totally different. So the farmers' issues at the state house, so when they're looking at issues that come before the legislature, their issue is going to be very different from someone that lives in urban Cleveland. And so if a representative is trying to represent their constituents, kind of want that area that looks the same.
So it would have the same issues, the same, doesn't necessarily have to be school districts, but maybe it is like important to have the same school districts or issues that
Right.
they might run into. So why did it take 90 plus pages to make this? Like, why is it, I mean, you sort of touched on this, that it's really long, but are you hiding something? Should we really be that hard?
It's the good question again. Getting everything right. I mean, imagine, right, is how do you choose the judges, right? What does that process look like? Then, how do they choose the 15? And then, once you get the 15 in place, then how do you do the maps? What does the calendar look like? How long do they have to do the maps? How long, what does that look like after this first initial time? What does that look like going forward? So when you put all of those pieces together and you go through not only the decision process, but then what the map drawing itself looks like, you're into that, almost 40 pages.
All right. The signs. Signs are very similar. One says, yes, ban gerrymandering. One says, no, stop gerrymandering. Help me understand how both sides can be true with this.
Again, this comes down to the ballot language. So when they wrote the ballot language, they are using the word gerrymandering. And they are saying that that issue 1 is to gerrymander Ohio. So they have, knowing that this was to end gerrymandering, they are trying to confuse voters, and it's working. And it's working, right? So we are yes on the side. So we have almost even stopped using the word gerrymandering because it is confusing voters. It really is. And so the idea of citizens, not politicians. I mean, that is the language out there, is that citizens, not politicians. And not, again, that idea of just making it a fair democracy. I mean, at the very foundation, this is about democracy. It is about a fair representation of who we are as Ohioans and who we are at the State House. And we're not 80%. That's not who we are. And so it is about getting here and finding that true fair maps and those true fair districts.